Tokenize, let's innovate, bringing answers to the digital state. From finance to games, we're redefining, connecting the dots, the future is shining.
So this topic is about the new trend in the equity markets. It's cryptocurrency kind of treasuries and how it started. I think it would be good to start off with just some special basic introductions and maybe tell us a little bit about if you've been involved in one of these yet. So why don't I just start off with you, Deven?
Sure. Hey everyone, my name is Deven Soni. I am the CEO of Matador Technologies, which is a publicly traded Bitcoin treasury company. So definitely involved. We started about 3 years ago, went public in December.
I'm Ron Levy, CEO of the crypto company. We started our company in 2017. I believe we have the status of having the first Bitcoin treasury, and quite honestly, plus 50 altcoins back in the day. We've been at it for quite a long time, publicly traded.
Hi, my name is Brittany Kaiser, and I am a co-founder and board member of Gryphon Digital Mining, soon to be American Bitcoin, which has a very strong Bitcoin treasury strategy. And I have been advising a few companies in different markets outside of the U.S. on how to adopt such a strategy and helping them find investors that are specifically interested in that strategy.
I'm Hans Thomas. I'm the founder at 10x Capital. We've been arranging a lot of these publicly traded Bitcoin treasury companies. I'm very proud to have done Nakamoto this last 2 weeks. He's the $710 million in that transaction, and the goal there is really to invest that all over the world. So we're doing Bitcoin treasury companies all over the world. One of the first ones in that portfolio. I mean, obviously Matador is part of that whole ecosystem with UTXO. But you've done a Braj here, which is a publicly traded company in Bahrain, which is going to be listed shortly or on June 19th, available in a bunch of different markets, including the UAE. So very excited to be here and talk about this.
Yeah, so I guess this first major question is, why should companies do this as a public company? And then what should the investors kind of expect? I think let's start there and then maybe kind of go from that topic.
I think on the should side, I mean, there's the Bitcoiner angle, which is number go up, utility, and all that, right? So I think it's in all of our, and that's why I think Michael Saylor and Fong and like a lot of the guys, over there have been so helpful to the rest of us in getting this, up and running with so many other companies, is that it really does, create a tremendous tailwind for Bitcoin. And we are all members of the corporation, shareholders of the corporation called Bitcoin. We're members of the country called Bitcoin, right? And so I think from that standpoint, we are, we're eager to see more of this tailwind, right? I think that, with corporations, this has opened a lot of people's eyes, right? Like our deal traded up 25x, 30x or something like that, right? We started getting calls from, I was on the phone today with, one of the founders of Blackstone, right? Who wants to do one of these, right? Like that's where we are today. Now that having been said, is it advisable that those guys do them? Who knows, right? But if we can orange pill the institutions, I think that's great. If you look at it, Norges Bank, for example, is the single largest shareholder of MicroStrategy. Norges Bank isn't even allowed to buy Bitcoin. That's the Norwegian Sovereign Wealth Fund, the largest institutional investor in the world. But they own literally, nearly 9+% of MicroStrategy. And they've never spoken to Fong, and they've never spoken to Michael. And, they're showing that support. So that's where we see this going, right? Is institutional investors getting orange pilled because they can buy this in a QSIP, they can buy this in a ticker symbol. And, that's going to be very powerful moving forward, especially with the sovereigns and the public investors.
Yeah, I would say firstly, in terms of longevity of some companies' strategy, I think you don't have to be a Bitcoiner to see that Bitcoin is the best performing asset class in our lifetime. And so starting to add that to the balance sheet is a longevity strategy. And it's very hard to argue against that. I would also completely piggyback off of what you said, which is that right now we're looking at tons of institutional adoption and even adoption by governments, and they're looking at ways to touch Bitcoin or touch Bitcoin holding companies. And the easiest way is to buy public liquid shares. So publicly listed companies having a Bitcoin strategy is incredibly exciting for new investors that aren't Bitcoiners, that haven't been thinking about this for, 10, 15 plus years. So I think there's obviously the third part when we talk about marketing. We've seen companies around the world, including some of the companies here represented here, where as soon as you announce a Bitcoin treasury strategy, you get a couple 100% or even a couple 1,000% in some cases on your public listing shares. So it's that's insane. It's turning public stocks into meme coin level interest from institutions. So you have to pay attention to that. There are no other marketing strategies like that exist today. So from a PR and marketing perspective, all companies should be talking to their CMO about this, not just to their investors and thinking about their CFO and how they're managing their bottom line.
I love that about the public companies and the meme coins, because you are certainly not wrong about that. But I'm going to chrono it a little bit because maybe it'll give it some context. And that is, when we did it in 2017 as a public company, you have to get audited. Every year you have to be audited. Nobody knew how to do that. That had never been done. It was a massive challenge. I'm very proud of the fact that we accomplished that, and it went very well. In 2020, Michael Saylor, you all know what he's done, but I'm not sure if you all know the reason he did it at that moment. He had a profitable public company that sold software, and he had a lot of money in his treasury. And the famous quote I like to hear from him is, if we hit 2% inflation every year as hoped for, in 72 years, the dollar is worth zero. So he said, why do I want to keep this cash and watch it melt like an ice cube? So he went looking around. He came up with Bitcoin. So he started buying it in 2020. And every quarter since then, he's bought Bitcoin, and he's never sold. You guys know the rest of the story. He's gone to the street for many billions of dollars, and he's built up this huge treasure chest. He's a Bitcoin maxi, and he did that strategy. And he certainly was part of blazing the trail for what's to come next. And what's happened recently is these companies are going public on this. And as Brittany just said, they're getting these huge bumps right away. That in itself, this is opinion, is not going to last. That's a now thing. And I think it's great, and it's great for our whole industry, but that's a now thing. I don't think you can rely just on that. So the next step of what is happening is going back to the industry of blockchain decentralization. And why in the heck do tokens even exist, and what are they there to do? Well, now that we have some clarity on what we can do, we can build those things. So you're starting to see public companies start doing that. That doesn't mean they train the world on decentralization. That's a slow process, but it means they can build tools to support that the masses can use without being that focused on why they're using it. So I think we go from the meme coin analogy, which I love. It's just pivot time. That's all. This is still working. It'll work for a little while longer. I don't know how long, but I'm good with it, and I think it's fantastic. But what's next is also very important.
I'm into that. I will just kind of make one sort of delineation here, which is what I see as the difference between a Bitcoin treasury strategy and a Bitcoin treasury company. So I think there's this whole, wave, obviously, of Bitcoin treasury companies, which are happening today. Those, the goals of those are to take advantage of the financial instruments that is in public markets, as well as the liquidity that exists in public markets, as well as the inherent nuances of Bitcoin, the volatility, the potential yield, the liquid sort of, kind of options and derivatives market to, sort of create levered ways to aggregate more Bitcoin. I think those companies trade for a reason, which is a whole lot of people really like volatility, and these companies have volatility, and there's a whole lot of capital that got pulled together ages ago and recently, as well as regulations that benefit sort of institutional investors that want volatility. I think there's a second side of this, which are large companies that are putting Bitcoin on their balance sheet for the melting ice cube example, which I think is a really sound one as well. And I think to that point, there's going to be a whole lot more companies that are sort of the latter, which are, let's take 5-10% of our balance sheet, put it into BTC, because the goal of our balance sheet is to preserve shareholder value and not not sort of leak it away. So I do think that, that's one of those kind of tipping points arguments where it'll, today it might be, less than 1% of companies. I would suspect then by 2030, it might be, 30 to 50% of companies that have some form of BTC on their balance sheet. Same with sovereign nations that historically held gold. Not the top of this panel, but I do think that there are some intriguing, sort of value drivers for Bitcoin treasury companies for the reason that there's a whole large pools of capital that chase something that is purpose built for these Bitcoin treasury strategies.
Yeah, I think it's broken down into this kind of perfect storm of the high inflation, the printing of fiat, the fact that having a treasury strategy as a CFO makes a lot of sense to have an asset. It doesn't matter what the asset is. Let's just forget about Bitcoin for a sec. Having an asset. And then there are companies that are kind of like shell companies. That now the MSCR company, they're a software company. They actually have, and they still sell their software. But to me, he's more of a Bitcoin strategy, even though it's kind of taken over his life. Whereas some of the companies that you guys are mentioning, like I'm one of the investors, actually Gryphon, just as a fair disclosure rule. But so the fact is that there's there's that type of company, and you're getting those pops. When do you think? And then the actual third one is this thing about the kind of Solanas, the altcoin strategy, like the top 20 alts, and putting those on a balance sheet. That's a different strategy, right? So if you look at those three strategies, we talked about the first two. What do you think about the third? And also, what do you think about, is the trade, like I'm a trader, I'm an investor, I've been investing, I've been in fintech for a long time. I know that the trade ends at some point. So I think that's going to be part of this like 3-tier conversation, which is, are alts next? And is the red pill done? Or is the actual treasury strategy changing?
I wouldn't characterize the alt stuff right now that you're seeing as necessarily treasury strategy, but more capitalizing on, access, right? I think it's like an access play. We've spent a lot of time with the couple of Solana treasury companies here. I was also an investor in Valkyrie, which, Leah Wald is now Sol Strategies. And so we like the fact that, that crypto is making it into public markets, right? Maxis, we are, but at the same time, there's a utility in, a lot of these blockchain technologies that, people need access to at some level. And they want to be able to invest in the success of these companies, right? It's challenging to do that as these companies are all private, right? So the token really is the only way. And if they don't really have the ability to invest in the token for whatever reason, this becomes a much easier way to kind of access it. Now, when you look at the valuations, the Bitcoin treasury companies are relatively sane, generally speaking. While ours is up, 25x right now, that's, not on a fully distributed basis once the pipe unlocks and everything like that, right? So all that likely comes back to earth. The stuff that you're seeing in a lot of these, alt companies, the Solana companies, is somewhat detached from any sort of nominal, value, right? And is much more a bet on, whether or not they'll be able to grow a big business, and is linked to a certain extent to these validator businesses and other, sort of second order, strategies those businesses may have. So, I think there is a decent amount of opportunity there because those businesses are fundamentally coming out and saying, we're operating companies. We're not really treasury companies, right? We're going to do this and we're going to stake and we're going to validate, and we're going to make money. And that's going to, you can think of those almost like as like LSTs, like it's like a publicly listed, liquid staking token. And that's kind of the way that they're doing it. And it's interesting. Will the tide go out? I mean, the tide always goes out in all bubbles, right? And it very clearly, you are seeing some bubble mechanics like you do all the time when there's something novel. There's a lot of capital seeking to replicate, a specific type of trade. But at the end of the day, on the other side of it, there's in the case of the Bitcoin treasury companies, a durable asset that we want more of. And so whether, the capital is coming in for the right reasons is not really terribly material to us, right? Like, ultimately it facilitates more Bitcoin, on the balance sheet across the world.
Yeah, I think we're seeing only the very beginning of public companies starting to think about holding something besides Bitcoin on their balance sheet. I remember 5 years ago when you were first starting to raise for Gryphon to take it public, and I put together a strategy for us to be staking and validating across tons of these different networks. And our lawyers and our auditors rightly told me Like there's no way you're going to get away with this. This is difficult enough that you have Bitcoin on your balance sheet. And I said, well, of course we have Bitcoin on our balance sheet. We're a large Bitcoin mining company. Like, we can't get around that. And he said, well, yeah, but even just having Bitcoin on your balance sheet is going to be very difficult to even take you through the NASDAQ listing process. So how do you propose that you're going to start staking and validating on all these networks that the agencies have never heard of before? There's no way you'll ever get public on NASDAQ that way. And that was true, obviously, 5 years ago. It's true.
It was today last year.
It was true today. Honestly, tried to get through the SEC process with a treasury of tons of tokens that the SEC has never heard of, maybe with Ethereum and Solana and a few other. Okay. But anything more than that, and you're still going to spend a silly amount of money on auditors and lawyers and still probably not get approved. We're still waiting for the federal legislation that says that we can do some of the things that we feel like it's okay we can do right now, but it's not actually legally okay yet. We're getting there. So I think we're going to see a huge blossom of this as soon as we see the next pieces of federal legislation besides the Genius Act being passed. We're going to see new ones passed in the fall as soon as David Sachs publishes his 4-year plan, which will come out in September, October. And we'll see tons of RFPs and a ton of federal legislation. Our first federal digital asset legislation passed the Genius Act. And then public companies are going to go crazy for this. So I think we're not even seeing a tiny, tiny slice of where this is going to go.
And that's both on the Bitcoin side mostly, and then ETH potentially, and then everything else. So, and I think actually Shiba Inu is trying to ask a question. I'm just kidding.
Can I make a comment about Solana? Because Hans, Valkyrie, Leah, Sol Strategies, great success. But let's look at it from the people in this room that just love crypto. I looked at the volume of Solana since Sol Strategies. It's up. So I would suggest that while we all knew about Solana, them going public like that brought it to the attention of people outside our industry. And that is something not to be ignored. It's a really big deal because prior to that, Solana was just an also-ran, right? Successful one, but an also-ran. And it changed the game. And I think that's what you're going to see happen. And I am going to hope that the chains and our tokens it happens with are super solid. We don't need them to really be meme coins, as mentioned. We need them to be solid projects that actually will function properly and continue to grow. And you guys kind of started it, and I know Metaplanet with you guys, like these are breaking down barriers. And from the crypto world, entertain it by staying in touch with what's going on in the equities world with all this. I think it's very important, but also realize what's going on there so you can see how it affects our cryptos and tokens in the industry.
No, just to be brief, I completely agree with what everyone said. I think, the visibility of new tokens is important. I mean, I think when you think about a marketplace, when the rails get built, so, for example, if you look at a commodities market, right? Okay, well, we sell, pork bellies and now you sell frozen countries and oranges. It's really the same thing. You've got the same regulatory class. And it's one of the things that we had to do. So before Matador, I helped run a company called tokens.com back in, 2018. We bought, ran validators for Solana and Polkadot and, a whole bunch of things, Oasis, publicly traded. It took a little time for the auditors to get used to it, but, they eventually did because, you have SOC 1, SOC 2 custodians that start expanding their business to take advantage of this stuff. At the end of the day, it's kind of the same thing. It's a ledger entry. Even the NASDAQ, to your point, it's been historically just absolutely terrible. The reason why Galaxy went public in Canada, now does seem to be loosening up a bit. Galaxy is just moving the NASDAQ. DeFi Technologies moving the NASDAQ. So I think we are seeing kind of that wave of alternate tokens, alternate liquidity moving to major global markets, which is great for discovery, like you were saying.
So if you're a person, she's sitting here, you have Bitcoin, you're holding maybe some altcoins or something, and you probably have stocks too. You probably have equities, maybe you trade options. What do you think? Like, what's the actual kind of the kind of advice that you would give for more of the retail prosumer type person that maybe wants to trade around these types of positions?
First of all, not advice, right? Not advice, but
not advice ever.
But look, it's a very easy place to get leverage. It's a very easy place, to essentially translate somewhat illiquid holdings, into liquid holdings. And so I think like first order for folks here that, that have crypto and, want to participate here and wonder why on earth someone would come in, to a, something that's trading above NAV. The answer is leverage, right? The answer is, flexibility. The answer is liquidity, and the ability to really kind of, obtain that leverage without conversion risk, without liquidation risk, right? So, these are really, the kind of, dynamics driving a lot of the contributions or the conversions into these stocks. For someone who's, not really familiar with crypto and is, now beginning to learn, we are definitely seeing retail adoption, and there's so many influencers that are pushing all of these different stocks. There's a new podcast that literally spun up like in the last several days called Naka Nation that is got a film crew that's supposed to interview us. Like literally, like these things are happening very rapidly, right? Like where there's
And that's the prosumer, that's the active trader market.
Yeah,
that market.
It's very interesting, right? And it's really coming from these MSTR True North, types, right? That have, come out there almost as like professional pundits. Spent a lot of time with those guys. They're starting to join boards. Like it's really getting very compelling, right? That, that they're helping each other essentially learn more about this. And, I find that compelling in terms of like how someone should allocate to something like this. I mean, that's really, between themselves and their financial advisors. But when we see, how, most of these crypto assets have done by comparison to most TradFi assets, an allocation here probably is sensible, right?
And so I guess the actual question now is what's next?
Well, in my opinion, what I think is next, instead of just holding the core asset, we're going to see a lot more public companies investing on building on these core assets. I think number one is building on Bitcoin. There are tons of people in this audience that are spending all of their time on that. I know that I am spending all of my time on that, tokenizing RWA, specifically real estate on Bitcoin. And I really believe that we've already seen it. A lot of the biggest Bitcoin miners have started to create their own Bitcoin L2s and side chains. We're starting to see a lot of large public companies that are also involved with funds that are Bitcoin ecosystem focused. And so I think that is definitely the next thing, because how do we improve the value of the core underlying asset is by bringing increased utility and functionality and attention. And but really, it's the utility. Besides just thinking about this as a treasury strategy or assets on the balance sheet, what can we do to make those assets more exciting, more functional, and have loads more PR and marketing value than it does by itself? So I think, projects like Bitcoin OS and Trio and bringing RWA to Bitcoin, that is absolutely huge and something that I'm going to be spending like nearly every waking moment working on for the foreseeable future.
I really think that I'm hearkening back to all the conferences I've been at these last 10 years or so. More than we could count. Probably seen a lot of these faces there. But think about all the exhibitors, right? All the ones that paid for those booths or developing these great projects. And quite honestly, the very, very vast majority didn't make it, right? Not because they didn't have good ideas. It's because it was just too early. The world wasn't ready for it. What has happened since it turned 2025 is spectacular. It is the most exciting moment in our industry because we've got pent-up expertise. We have pent-up passion and, quite honestly, pent-up funding to go and get this. And those of us who have spent years and years with the wind in our face and having our legs chained together and still move forward, now that it's freed up, all that knowledge, all that skill, all those relationships are all coming to the surface. And it is nothing short of spectacular. And it's less important for me when I think about it personally to judge where it's going to be in X amount of time, to absorb the now. This is spectacular. And the obviously public company side, what we're doing is designed to this year where we're going. We have the largest education company in blockchain. We train the U.S. government and the biggest companies in the world for years and years. And now we get to take that and all the relationships and apply it under a public company. And it's the Think back on everybody you met and you thought that was a good idea. Call them back now.
Awesome. Well, I think we're out of time. I just want to say thank you to our guests here. They're all been very busy and they're doing a lot of great things. And if you want any more information, they'll be here afterwards. And thanks again, everyone. I'll turn it back over to you, the lovely hostess with the mostest.
Thank you. And thank you guys.
Innovate, bringing assets to the digital state. From finance to games, we're redefining, connecting the dots. The future is shining.